Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Francesca,
Thank you.
for doing this with us. I'm looking forward to a deeply insightful conversation.
No
So-
pressure.
So I'm going to move this. My goal here is to take this conversation a little bit inside out. I want to start from organizations, in particular IBM, where you've been very active. How does it look? How does responsible AI look inside the organization? Then I want to sort of broaden it to the scale of companies, regulators, users, sort of the societal scale. And then take a different direction and try to understand whether trust and responsible AI can be thought of as a differentiator or can be thought of as a strategic investment. So to start with, let me ask how have you seen responsible AI take shape in IBM? In particular, who owns it and how has that evolved?
Yeah, so at IBM is a very company-wide approach. We have an internal, it's called the Responsible Tech Board, that has representatives, as members of the board, representatives of all the business units, not just the technical ones. And this board makes decisions. It's not an advisory board. Okay? So it makes decisions about reviewing use cases, so whatever we use internally, that is based on AI, and whatever we deliver to our clients. It also is a board that also has several work streams and tries to keep up with the amplified or new risks that come with the evolution of the AI technology. So writes white papers, and then this white paper, for example, on foundation models risk, or on agentic AI risk, or on synthetic data. And then the content of these white papers also gets transformed into our product and platform, so there is a pipeline. It also puts together tools, software tools that the team can use to address the risks, like whether it's bias or transparency or other things. And this board, of course, has about 20 or 20-something members, but these are not just the only people that are discussing or doing something concretely about responsible AI. There are a lot of other people that are called focal points in the business units, and these are the people that are the link between the board's decisions and that business unit. So they bring down the decisions that are relevant for that business unit. They come from the business units, they bring to the board challenges, feedback, whatever problems, or even grassroots initiatives around AI ethics that come from the business units that can be elevated to the level of the whole company. So one thing that this structure, of course, has been put together over several years and has been evolving. For example, one very important thing in the evolution is really to integrate the AI ethics review process of the various use cases with many other internal processes that the teams were used to do, like security by design or privacy by design. And now they also do in an automatic way, and they are triggered to do this other process in taking care of the AI ethics issues since the start of a project and not at the end, because several years ago they were coming when they were ready to deploy and sign the contract, and they say, oh, it's the board, we need you to approve it because we need to sign the deal, So that was not satisfactory for whatever decision you want to take, but was not good for the team, because maybe sometimes the board was saying, sorry, you didn't take care of the things in the right way, so you had to go back, retrain, or this and that. So it was actually slowing down their job.
So it was responsible AI by design.
Yeah.
And were there any lessons learned in the process about how maybe not to, how was this particular technology different from other technologies that there were guardrails around or there were processes around? Did IBM learn anything new about AI being different from what other technologies were?
Well, I think this integration was a lesson learned because again at the beginning we didn't have this level of integration and teams were confused because we were asking questions to them that also other processes were asking, but maybe in a slightly different way, so they were confused and they were slowed down by the process. So we really needed to learn how to do it over time, how to improve that, to make sure that we were providing a governance that was agile enough to evolve, but also that was not slowing down the work of the teams producing AI solutions. And then I think another lesson, or not lesson, but I think another thing is that we started with this internal board idea without really thinking there were other options. But now we see that other companies use other options. They even have external oversight, committees and so on. And instead now I think that it is a lesson learned, at least for me, that I see a lot of values in internal boards. Because internal boards can react much faster to use case assessment. They can do it, we meet, the board, by the way, meets every month, but then we meet almost every week if there are use cases to be reviewed. Speed, but also, again, to be an integral part of the company. So that sends the message that a responsible tech approach is an integral part of the company's success. It's not something that is antagonistic to what the company wants to do. And the third thing is that by having it internally, all these processes and decisions, then the company takes full responsibilities for the decisions. It's not that the company can say, oh, I did this because they told me to do it.
Right.
So you have really an integral part. And I think that the main message is really, a company needs to be aware that for the success of the company, they need the responsible tech approach.
Right. So if a company was building things from scratch, what are the first one or two or three things that you would recommend that they look at as you're putting such a process in place?
Well, one thing that maybe I didn't mention, but is very, very fundamental, is the culture and education of everybody in the company. Again, not just the technical teams, but everybody in the company has to be aware what are these AI ethics issues? Why are they relevant for the company? Because, again, you can list many, many different AI ethics issues, but some of them are more relevant or less relevant depending on the business model of the company, whether you are a consumer AI company or an enterprise AI company like IBM. So some issues are more relevant and others are less. So everybody has to be aware of these issues, what they mean. For example, I remember several years ago, we started piloting the use case review review of the use cases with the team, and we were talking to them about the bias issue, and this team was convinced that in their project there was no bias issue because in the project there was explicitly no protected variable. So there is no protected variable, so I don't have to care about bias. There is no bias here. But instead they were using proxy variables like zip code or things like that, which we know that they are very correlated to some protected variables, and they were not aware that there was this possible correlation. And so teams needed really to build a culture with a lot of design thinking, workshops and so on. So culture is the first thing. And then, of course, inside the company, culture of everybody, but also the culture of the people making decisions and evaluating their, reporting people. Because, of course, if you say you have to follow a process, but then you don't evaluate positively people that follow the process, then the process doesn't work.
Right.
So culture, education, incentives, right way of evaluating. And then, the tools and the processes are easy. They are available. There are many tools that are available. There are, processes and governance frameworks that people can look at what other companies that have spent time in building that, and they can adapt them to their own scenarios.
So are there some best practices that have started to develop in this field that any company that is starting out can start picking up, starting off from there?
Yeah, so there are a lot of, for example, even IBM put together a lot of open source tools that are available for transparency, for privacy, for explainability, for fairness, but also, again, there is a lot of documentation and transparency about also the governance approaches, no? And then, we speak to our clients, for example, that want to understand how do I build my governance, around a responsible AI, and we say, okay, we tell you what we do, and then we help you maybe understand how to adapt it in your environment. But again, tools are available, transparency about many governance approaches, there are documents that are available, but what I'm saying is that we spent a long time because we started a long time ago, around 10 years ago, and companies don't need to spend 10 years. They can build their own responsible tech framework now much, much faster, especially, and devoting much less resources, of course.
Right. So I'm going to now step a little bit into the more sort of ecosystem of companies, regulators, users.
Yeah.
And there are companies that are providing the core AI technology. There are companies that are using the AI technology for maybe enterprises, maybe end users. All of these people have a stake in responsible AI in different ways. What is the current lay of the land? How are the regulators working in this space? Are there places that you see this ecosystem working better, working well?
Yeah.
What's the state of affairs right now?
So first of all, yes, your point is very important. There are many different actors that play a role in the AI life cycles, from the collection of the data or curation of the data, from the training phase, the post-training phase, the development phase, the deployment, the monitoring. So there are so many phases, and each phase has one or more actors that play a role there. So the resulting system that people or a company are going to use is the result of the work of many different people that play different roles. So that creates, for example, a very distributed responsibility, which can be challenges to assign responsibilities, because again, you have a result at the end and you see a behavior of this result, but who is responsible for this behavior if there are so many actors that play the role? So that's already a challenge for regulators, that want to assign responsibility or to say, somebody has violated the regulation, but who has violated the regulation, especially if the regulation is focused on the outcome, how the system behaves, what harms are generated by the system. And this is, for example, the case of the European AI Act, that is a product-based regulation on AI that says, I don't care who created or who built the thing, I only care that if somebody uses AI in this high-stake domain, in this high-risk domain, then I care that it has a certain behavior, or better, it does not have certain behaviors that can be harmful, right? So this is very vague in the regulation, and then, in fact, the regulation requires the standards are being I think that they expect about 10 or more standards to define exactly what it means, how the technology should behave in those high-risk domains. And so that's one approach. You say, okay, I don't care, but I only care about I treat AI as a product, not as a process, right? And that's one approach that regulation has decided to take, and it's a kind of focus on the harms and try to avoid them as much as possible by requiring, however, that people do something to mitigate those harms along this complete life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up this notion of product-oriented. Is there an alternative that doesn't look at just the end product and tries to inculcate responsibility along the way as maybe a value or a culture?
The alternative would be to say, yes, I care about the harms, but what I focus on is the process and the best practices that people use, all these different actors use in doing all these, in these different phases of the AI life cycle. So I say, okay, I define some best practices, some standards. So if you are collecting data, this is the best practice you have to use. If you are doing the post-training, this is the best practice or the standard that you need to follow. And then if you follow that standard, then it could be that something harmful comes out that you didn't foresee, but at least I know that everybody followed that standard. So that would be the opposite approach. And I think that you want a combination of the two. No? You want people to follow some best practices and be and if there is no one best practice for everybody, at least you want transparency about the process that different companies and different actors have used, but also you want to care about the outcome and the actual behavior. But at this point, AI is able to do amazing things according to some initial objectives, but also is able to have a lot of emerging behaviors that are difficult to foresee. And these emerging behaviors, some of them are very useful and beneficial, and some of them may not be desired or intended. And therefore, it's very difficult to predict or foresee all possible risks or unintended behaviors that will come out.
And do you see, I mean, are there any parallels in other industries where these kinds of unforeseen or maybe not emergent, but unforeseen behaviors were there, and there are protocols in place that can help judge it, maybe not assign responsibility, but think about how to correct it, and how do you learn from that? Are there things that...
Yeah, there has been a lot of trying to understand whether there is some analogy in other technologies or in other things that we use in society. You know, often people think about drugs. No? So we know that every drug that is released, available to people, is beneficial for the vast majority of people, but there are always a small minority of people for which it is harmful. And we know that. And the society accepts in any case, because overall, it's like a consequentialist approach. No? Overall, at a societal level, we think that it is beneficial for society, even if we know that some people will be harmed. And we don't know which ones, so we cannot expect or predict or tell the people that it's going to be harmful for them. So in that case, again, the protocol approach, the process approach has been used more than saying, if there is harm, I don't accept this thing to be released and to be used. So that's one analogy. And of course, I mean, all these analogies are have some point in common with AI, but others are not. Sure. For example, AI evolves. You know, we've seen new things released every week with new capabilities and new risks and so on. So the evolution of AI is not like a drug. A drug, usually does not evolve. You can have other drugs, but not with the same speed. So that requires a different approach. Also, for two reasons. One is the speed, and one is the scale of the impact of the technology.
So there's an interesting question that came from somebody in the audience. It goes back to a comment that you made before about the speed of innovation within organizations. Yeah. But more broadly, how do you balance innovation and caution in a setting with a technology that is evolving and may evolve on its own? I mean, how does the role of transparency potentially play a role? What could we be doing in such a setting? Balancing innovation and risk.
Well, some people think that a responsible AI approach or a regulation about AI is slowing down innovation. From the point of view of the US, for example, Europe is seen as a way where, as a place where innovation is slowed down by regulation of AI. I mean, my point of view is that There is another analogy that sometimes I like to use, which is like car safety. Car safety. Okay. In car safety, what do we do about car safety? We do basically three things. One is building the car with some safety features, like seat belts or even brakes, right? So we build the car and embed in the building of the car some safety features. So this would be like analogical to an AI, building AI, following processes, making sure that embedded in the building an AI, there are some safety mitigation inside. Second thing that we do on car safety, we have rules. We have rules on the road. We have stop signs, we have speed limit, we have traffic lights. So this would be like external governance or other corporate or regulations that we use. And then third thing, we want everybody to be educated about the capabilities and the risk. We cannot have, you need to be educated, you need to pass a test, a driver license, before you can drive a car. And we build these three things, and we don't see the collection of these three things as slowing down car adoption or even slowing down the speed of the driving. We just see that as a way to be able to adopt cars in a large scale and drive fast but safe. Okay? So the perception that a responsible AI approach, which can follow these three buckets, education of people, regulation and governance in companies, and embedding responsible and AI mitigation in the system, is slowing down innovation is strange, because in other thing we see a large-scale adoption. Everybody, most people have cars and drive cars, which can be good or bad. Now we can examine that, but we don't really see safety buckets, these three safety buckets for cars as slowing down.
Sure.
So to me, again, responsible tech approach is not slowing down innovation, it's just making sure that innovation is sustainable over time and with such a large scale.
And perhaps trusted by society.
And trusted, because trust is really fundamental in having people and society accept a technology, and also having companies, institutions adopt the technology. So if we care about the adoption of AI and all the benefits that can bring, we should care about building a system of trust around the technology, but also around those that build and deploy the technology.
So that segues, it's a nice segment into thinking about whether responsible AI and trust building, both internally as well as externally, could this be viewed as a strategic investment as opposed to simply a compliance requirement?
I personally think so, because we have seen also with the recent study that we have done over more than 1,000 companies all over the world, that companies that devote more attention and resources and people to responsible tech approaches, they are also more successful.
In the long term.
In the long run.
Yes.
And so the point is that, putting together resources and people in building a responsible tech approach, and not just building, but implementing it, has a return on the investment. But you have to be more expanding this notion of return on investment, because it's not just the return of a quantitative return today or tomorrow, but it is also a qualitative return in terms of value for your company for the future. And so companies that have this value-based approach for their company, they want to build value and sustainable value for their company, they understand this notion of expanded return on investment.
Looking ahead, what do you think, when you think of this as more of a strategic investment, you mentioned the fact about a value-based view of companies. There is also, in many settings, particularly financial services, where there is regulation, and people take the view that I meet the regulation. and therefore I'm good. Whereas what you are sort of saying implicitly is that maybe we need to go beyond just what is required by compliance, but thinking about how do you see companies making good on that? Because right now, at least when we look around at the AI sort of ecosystem, a lot of people are more focused on extractive ways of building as opposed to this value-based, forward-looking view of AI. What do you think will change? Like, who could be the change makers in that space? Would it be companies? Would it be the users? Would it be some other people?
I hope that society and clients, society in general, will push companies to adopt more this value-based approach, because it's more sustainable in the long term, it's more, considers more the multi-stakeholder approach where society is involved in the decisions. So many companies deal with this AI ethics risk with the risk and compliance teams. No? But the risk and compliance teams think about compliance, which is tell me what the regulation asks me to do and I'll do it, period. And I don't care, whether it is good or bad. Tell me, and because I don't want to pay fines for violating the regulation. And the risk and compliance, so the risk part is usually thinking about risks for the company, internal risk. You say, what are the risks for the company if I don't do this? And so reputational risk, I can lose some clients or I can pay some fine on things like that. And so this is a very instrumental and reactive and very minimal approach. No? And the other one, as you say, the value-based approach is instead can be a risk-based approach, but the risks that you should think about are not the risk for your company, are the risk for users, for people, for society, for impacted communities. And understanding that if you take care of these external risks for society and for people, then as a consequence, you are taking care of also the risk of your company. So the result is okay, what you want, which may be taking care of the risk of your company, but this is not the goal. The goal is addressing the risk for people and society, and the consequence is that you are doing good for addressing the risk of your company. So it's a different mindset. The result doesn't change, but it's a really completely different mindset that allows you to create value for your company, but as a consequence of being beneficial for society.
So we have about 10 seconds left. Is there something that we didn't cover that you think was missed? Something that the audience should think about when they're thinking about responsible AI from various perspectives? We have students here, we have academics, industry, some parting sort of thought.
So recently right now I'm teaching a course at Columbia on AI ethics. And for me, it was a great opportunity to talk with students, which usually I don't do. I talk with people in other companies or various global organizations, but not with students. So for me, it's a great experience, and I'm very impressed by the insight and the depth of they have a weekly reflection on the topic that we cover in the course. So I'm really inspired by their depth of the reflections on these issues. And so that makes me very hopeful for the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming to that.